Hello everyone, Eric Chappelle, Civil Community Evangelist for Autodesk, and I want to welcome you to today's webcast, InfraWorks 2018.2, Enhancements to Road Modeling and Quantities. Our star speaker today is Prateek, and I'll be giving him over to you in just a moment, but for now, I want to talk to you a little bit about our webcast series, and in case it's your first time here, and a little bit about our community. I do want to point out, in case I forget, that InfraWorks 2018.2 isn't quite out yet, so the stuff that you're going to see today is a preview of what's coming, but we hope to have that out to you soon. So as I mentioned, this is our webcast series. We do this twice a month, or try to hit a twice a month frequency, with the first and third Wednesday of the month being the goal. The goal is to provide information to you folks, our civil engineering community, about features in our civil products, primarily InfraWorks and Civil 3D, but we can get into other products as well, depending on what workflow we're talking about or what part of the industry we're talking about. It's also a chance to give you the ability to ask questions and provide feedback. I'll share some details on that in a minute or two. And generally speaking, we just want to bring you guys, the users of our software, a little closer to us, the folks that make the software. That's always going to be a good thing. Our next webcast is going to feature Charlie Ogden, who is actually here, one of the folks in the background who's going to be answering questions today. And Charlie's going to be taking a deeper dive into the customs, into the parts editor portion of both InfraWorks and Civil 3D. And the reason I say a deeper dive, Charlie did a webcast for us just maybe a month or two ago about these functions, more introducing them. And in this webcast, he's going to go a little deeper, focus on custom storm parts, and give you some of the skills and knowledge that you need to start building some of your own parts for your standards and needs back at your office. So really looking forward to that. If you've got ideas for future webcasts, please share them with us. What do you want to see? You can type them right into the questions window of your GoToWebinar interface, and we download a log of all those questions every time. So when we're coming up with topics for upcoming webcasts, we'll go back and look through those lists and see what ideas you guys came up with. We'd much rather the ideas come from you than from us, because ultimately we want to show you what you want to see. I want to make sure that you all know about our new Autodesk Civil Engineering Community Center. The URL is civil-community.autodesk.com, and it's kind of a central hub for all things Autodesk Civil. So news about our products, forums, the user forums kind of feed into one central location here, the gallery where folks like you can post projects they're working on and get feedback from other users and maybe ideas and kudos and things like that. Tips and tricks, there are new ones every day. Webcasts, whether it's registering for the next webcast or watching a recording of one that you missed, it's all up there, and lots of other stuff too. So be sure to check out that site, civil-community.autodesk.com, bookmark it, visit it every day. There's always something new up there, and it's all relevant to Autodesk Civil products and our community of users. Little disclaimer, as I mentioned in the open of the webcast, the software isn't quite out yet, so this pretty much applies to everything that Prateek's going to talk about today, I believe, as far as things we're working on. There's no guarantee that you'll see these features until you actually see them, is basically what this disclaimer says, and don't make any purchasing decisions based on anything forward-looking. We encourage you to ask lots of questions. Unfortunately, because of the size of our audience, we can't open up the phone lines for questions, but we do encourage you to use the questions window on your GoToWebinar interface. We've got a whole team from the product team in the background looking at those questions, and they'll be providing answers. And if they see something particularly interesting, they'll chime in and interrupt Prateek, and we'll air out that question live on the air, so to speak, as part of the webcast. So don't be shy, ask lots of questions, provide feedback, the more the better. So with that, I'm going to change the floor over to Prateek, and he's going to take us through enhancements to road modeling and quantities. It's all yours, Prateek.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Hello, everyone. I'm Prateek Hejmady. I work on the product development team as a senior interaction designer. So what you might wonder, what is a senior interaction designer? So interaction designers are ones who focus on the design aspect of the interface, but not just the look and feel of it, but also in terms of how the workflow is helping you achieve your day-to-day tasks. So I work with a lot of people who use the product in their day-to-day activities. So I work with transportation engineers, roadway engineers, civil engineers, depending on whatever designation you have, PIM managers, and try to understand some of the challenges they're facing in the day-to-day workflow and how the software can sort of work through challenges they're facing and make it easier for them to achieve those end goals they have with the product. Like I said, I directly am embedded into the product teams. So I work with developers and product managers who define what the product's vision is and work in liaison with them to convey the ideas I've received or feedback I've received from people out in the market who use the product. So that's kind of what I do. I primarily work out of Boston, Massachusetts, in North America, and Manchester, New Hampshire, which is 1 hour apart. So I kind of work out of these two offices of Autodesk. Like I said, my passion is design and talking to people, trying to get insights, deeper insights, and bring that into the product design. So that's me. For today, as was already mentioned, we'll be looking through some of the enhancements we've worked on for 2018.2 around road modeling and quantities. Kind of just 3 short sentences for the agenda for how I'm going to walk through today's session. So it's going to be, this is probably there's only 2 slides I have here. So this is one of them, and we'll deep dive into the product itself to sort of walk through this. So the agenda is, number 1, we'll walk through some of the enhanced control we've provided while creating road alignments. So there's been some feedback we've received from customers in terms of challenges they were facing while creating and editing road geometry. So we've done some enhancements around that workflow. We'll slowly segue into some of the other aspects of the product in terms of how you could now create complex curve geometry, like back-to-back curves or compound curves inside for a road alignment as well. Towards the end, we'll talk about some of the enhancements we've done in terms of road quantity extractions and how you could now edit some of the advanced road component parameters as well. So that's kind of the high level of what I'll be walking through today. That said, I'm going to now dive into InfraWorks and walk you through these enhancements. All right, so you should see my home screen of InfraWorks now, and this is the 2018.2 release. I've gone ahead and created a model called Northborough I-290. I use Model Builder to create this model. So I'm going to go ahead and open this model up. It should be coming up in a second. All right, so what you see here is Interstate I-290, which runs just southwest of, actually west of Boston. So this is what you see. This is the eastbound highway, and this is the westbound highway out here. What you have is a collector cutting through, and then you have this sort of partial clover leaf which has been designed around it. What I'm going to talk about today is some of the challenges which was presented or has been talked about by our customers in terms of creating some of the more complex geometry. So in this case, one of the scenarios we'll talk about first is these ramp scenarios in terms of how you could get through those scenarios now with the new tool sets we've worked on with 2018.2. If you're new to InfraWorks, you may have noticed that, actually if you've used InfraWorks before, you will notice that there's some changes here. So when you go into this tool set, which is for roads and highways, and then go into the create tools, we've sort of merged a set of tools into a single tool called design roads. Component roads has always existed as is, but design roads, we've merged them all into a single tool. So it used to be in the past, in the previous releases, we used to have tool for highway, collector, arterial, local, defined by the design speed and function of that road. But now we've merged them all into a single set, a single tool called design road. What happens when you do invoke this tool is you'll see a sort of stack approach, which is like a property set of attributes which you could set up even before you start laying out the tool. So functionality that was provided by those different icons could still be achieved by going in here and changing the function and setting a new design speed if you need to. So if I wanted, I could still set up this as 50 mile per hour road, change the function to say collector, and then also be able to change the style of road that I'm trying to lay out. So say boulevard, and I'm just going to bulldoze through this section. So that's still the same capability that's existed in the product so far. It's just that we've merged the tools and provided those options in this region and consolidated that into that one section there. I'm going to go ahead and just delete this sort of road. So that was that. Some of the other enhancements we've done is around component roads. So again, when you invoke component roads now, you will see this sort of stack area which provides a set of functions, of attributes you could set up even before you start laying out the road alignment. You probably see the similar thing come up in Civil 3D. If you do use Civil 3D, this dialog box shows up and you set up a few attributes on it. In InfraWorks, we're just consolidating them into this region to the right. So that's kind of what this area is. Now, just for the benefit of people who have not used InfraWorks before, I want to clearly sort of quickly walk through the difference between a component road and a design road. So a design road is based out of style. So you see all these different styles of road. And let's say I just go ahead and select this road, just create this straight alignment. Now what you see here is this sort of cross-section style-based road which is created for a road. However, if I created a component road, you will see you have a lot more final control over the elements. The design here is more focused on longitudinal design, so you will have control over being able to select individual aspects of the road. So in this case, I'm selecting a lane, or I could select a Jersey barrier and define the attributes on that individual component. So for instance, I could change the length, width, etc. On that single piece that I've selected. I can also create a split component here. And have some more final control over how I'm defining the cross-section on the fly in this modeling space itself. So I could create transition zones, etc., etc. So there's a lot more finer control over the elements of the road, as you see, from a preliminary engineering perspective in a component road as opposed to a design road. Some of the other finer sort of detail or controls you see also is you see a lot more information on a component road as opposed to a design road. So if you selected a design road, you don't get the station information, etc. in the canvas, whereas you see that kind of information and more details of the road model in the canvas space itself. What I did, by the way, just now was switch from engineering view to a conceptual view. It's just the way I've set it up, where in conceptual view I see more the actual context of the model, whereas in engineering view I'm able to focus a little more on the road model itself. It kind of gives me takes away all the visual noise and lets me focus on the model itself. So you'll see me switch between these two views as we go along as needed as we walk through these different enhancements. So anyway, coming back to the point, so that's sort of the high level difference between design road and a component road for those who are new to the software. Now let's talk about the enhancements itself. So going back to this space here, I'm going to switch to the conceptual view so I could see what needs to be done. So I'm trying to sort of recreate this ramp scenario here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on Component Road tool. And what we have today in the software is by default PI-based layout. PI-based layout meaning I click a point, I define a point of intersection, and define another point of intersection. Let me switch to a curve type. And that would create sort of a curve in between. So you see this curve gets created as based on the point of intersection I've clicked in the previous step. What I'm going to do now is, because I'm trying to create this sort of tight ramp, I'm going to set the function to be local, set the attribute of the design speed to 15. Now, why I'm doing this is the design speed is one of the constraining factor for the flexibility I'll have with laying out the geometry. So if I now tried creating tighter curves, you'll see that the curves will be created based on the attributes I've set. So let me just make sure my GoToWebinar toolkit is coming up. So that was interrupting my view. So yeah, so design speed is a constraint which is set on how the road gets laid out. So if I set it to lower speed, I have much more flexibility in the curves that get added, as opposed to if I set it to say much higher design speed. So to demonstrate that quickly, if I am again just going to bulldoze through a random space here, you will see that the curves should start appearing at that point. Should probably zoom in a little more so you can see a little better. So you see I could get super tight curves going. The same would not be possible if I were to set the design speed to much higher speed. So one of the tips would be to set it to lower speed when you're starting it off for the first time, and then you could always set it up higher to a speed which makes sense for the constraint you're working with. So for instance, I could start off by just so I could get sort of flexibility in the curves that fit in. I could start off with 15, but change it to 65 miles per hour if I'm creating a new sort of interstate or a freeway. So that said, let me go ahead and create this PI. So today how it works is you would create this sort of PI-based layout. And a lot of the times what would happen is we would not get the flexibility that we was desired when creating this PI point. So a new way of doing this, just going to wait for a sec for the model to refresh, is what we've introduced as a tool called as element-based layout. Now the difference here between PI-based, which is like I said, you create a point of intersection and the curve gets added in. The element-based lets you have the control over creating the geometry by hand. So I could create a tangent and then follow it up with a curve, create a tangent again. So I have the manual control over being able to add this geometry. So let's quickly look at how that would work if I were to do it with element-based layout. I'm going to go ahead and delete this road. Start the tool over again and use element. Set the design standard is set to AASHTO. Speed is set to 15. I'm going to start at this point. You'll observe that as soon as I click this point, it automatically switches to a curve type. So I have it estimates the fact that now I can create a curve, but I can always override that as well. So when I say override, I could right click and add a curve and say, hey, let me add a curve at this point. So I could do that at any point of interest. So now let's just say I want to create a curve here and then switch back again to a different curve type. So I'm trying to do a reverse curve situation almost. Click there, it switches to a tangent, but I can always override that. But for now, tangent makes sense because I'm going to be using this stretch to create a straight tangent and then switch to a curve type. and then switch to a tangent tab, coming on to the main line. So that's kind of how it would work. Obviously, the assembly I used here was totally wrong. You wouldn't want a 4-lane with Jersey barrier for a ramp scenario. But what you'll see there is that flexibility you have in being able to create that sort of back-to-back curve or complex geometry on the fly during layout. One of the things you will notice is if you've used Civil 3D, a lot of the constraints you face there is with respect to understanding if it's a free type, fixed type, float type. We've tried to completely eradicate that sort of notion inside of InfraWorks where you have to remember the type of geometry, but rather just focus on the type of geometry itself. So you could just create back-to-back curves or a curve, tangents, or a curve, tangent, curve, tangent. So all those sort of complex geometry combinations can be created on the fly and not having to think whether it's fixed or float or free type. So let's go ahead and this time make sure I select the right sort of assembly. I'm going to go ahead and select just the lane, come off of here. So I'm just going to ballparking at this point. So I'm just going to probably place curve there, a tangent, curve, place a straight tangent here, curve here, tangent. All right, so now that's placed. Obviously, this was just ballparking. I would want to be able to go back in and fix some of the attributes of this alignment I just created. So I'm going to quickly switch to engineering view so I could see what was just created. So obviously you'll see the annotations for the start station, end station of the curve geometries. You'll see the actual stationing along the alignment as well. Some of the things you'll also notice is as you zoom in, you see more accurate sort of stations come in, pop in and pop out as you zoom in, zoom out. When you do select a geometry, you will now see more information on the geometry right here in the canvas itself. This was not possible in the past, but now you start seeing these attributes. If you do hit tab key at this point, you could go ahead and edit the values as well. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and type in, say, 420. I could edit that right there, and that should reflect in the geometry there. I could also directly click on that annotation and make it editable and key in a new value likewise. So that's possible. A couple of other sort of enhancements we've done is in providing more flexibility with the grips that you see here. So as in the past, you could still use the centerline grip on the arc to sort of increase or reduce the curve radii. So that's still available. What you also see here is if you saw the subsequent tangents, the preceding and the succeeding tangents, we show you the change in length of those tangents as well. So what we're trying to do here is provide you live feedback for the changes that's happening to the alignment as you're making these edits. So you get this live sort of feedback in terms of the impact that this edit is having on other geometries attached to this. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it there. I could also move the geometry on the whole. So I could select this sort of PI. So if you see, it's maintaining the radius of the curve that I've selected and letting me move it as a whole. However, that also means some of the other geometries are going to get impacted. So see further down the line, the curve at the bottom is also getting impacted because of this move. So that's something that may or may not be desired as you work through the situation or the constraints you're working with. If it's a green line, maybe you have that flexibility, maybe not. So, but the grip actually provides you a capability of being able to select the curve as a whole and move it along. There's a few other sort of capabilities also that you'll see here. In the past, the endpoint grips on the curve had the same behavior as the center point grip, but we've added some more flexibility around there Now this grip has a slightly different behavior. So here I could move it in almost a free sort of constraint. So you see a whole lot of things could change because of the move here. I could, if you look at the bottom section, you see there's a tip showing up called hold, shift, slide the point along the tangent. So depending on the context of the action you're performing, we will be showing these sort of tips that will come up in that bottom section of the canvas to provide you with more sort of advanced options in terms of keyboard shortcuts or keyboard enhancers to sort of constrain the behavior. So in this case, if I hit shift, you'll see the behavior will change. So I'm hitting shift right now. So it's almost constraining the movement that, or the limit the movement that I have with that grip at this point. So that's the same behavior you saw with the center point grip at this, with the keyboard enhancer. So I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so something else we've also done is just move this along a little bit so I'm not writing here. If we moved into this section, I'm going to just switch this out and convert the geometry to a spiral curve spiral. So select the geometry, right-clicked, and I selected to create a spiral curve spiral. As you see, the geometry is all shown to you in a slightly different color here. Now the same could be applied along the alignment. So as you see here, this alignment this curve is shown to you in green. However, if I went ahead and changed the design speed to say 40, it did change to yellow. This was a feature we added, I think, a couple of releases ago where it's showing you live feedback based on the constraint set. So here what's happening is the curve radius is obviously in violation of the design speed. So if I hovered onto the attribute in the stack, it says radius violates road design standard. The value that's supported by the standard is between 509 and 546. So if I do go in here and key it in 510, it should turn green. So you kind of get that sort of live feedback for a geometry being in violation or whether it's in violation or not. I'm going to switch back to 15 just for the demo purposes. All right, so let's come back to this spiral that was created earlier. So again, you see here that when you select a spiral curve spiral combination, so you do have a curve here, obviously based on the limits you had with the geometry. It was a fairly short curve, but I could go ahead and change the length of the spiral to say 35. So as that got regenerated, you do see now that the length of the curve is slightly larger. And capability here includes being able to directly tap through these values. So if I hit the tab key now, I could change the A value as well right here in Canvas. So I could now key in a new A value based on your computation or the standards you've set for the alignment and interest. So I could key in 45, and obviously the length and the other geometry is going to get impacted, but it does take the value right there in the canvas itself. Another thing to also notice is you could tap through these different attributes right there. So I could almost cycle through these right there at all points. So you see the highlights change between these different regions, annotations, or as I tap to it. So I could always go ahead and change it to 66. And like we saw in the earlier example, the spiral is still in violation, so you could either choose to ignore it or go ahead and fix it, but we do provide feedback for why it's in violation. So if I hover over this region, I'll see the geometrically possible range is between 0.49 to 49.65, but this range is obviously less than 90. So the design standard requires this spiral to be 90.94 or more. However, geometrically what's possible is just the range that's shown to you. So it's for the designer to sort of at this stage fiddle with the alignment and make sure it matches if they need to sort of conform to the standards set on the alignment. So that's that piece there. I do want to sort of segue into now also talking about a slightly different scenario. Go ahead and delete this and switch back again to conceptual view. Now here again, I'm going to just quickly demonstrate the fact that you could create back-to-back-to-back the compound curves scenario as well with the element-based tool. So I'm going to start off at this point. I can kick it off with a tangent, or I could right-click and just kick it off with a curve. So you also now have the capability of being able to start things off with a curve. This was not possible in the past. So you could now have an alignment which starts off with a curve, let's just see, I'm just ballparking here, not necessarily giving a whole lot of attention to the accuracy, and also end with a curve. So you see I created a whole bunch of curves back to back to back, and starting off and ending with a curve as well. So that's possible as well. You could now go in and retrofit it to your needs to make sure it obviously fits the constraints set. A lot of our focus has been in making sure the editing capability is easy as well. Try to minimize the impact on subsequent geometries has been one of the key driving factors in our designs as well. So as you now try to move, we try to reduce the impact as much as possible downstream. So if you see the attached geometries, which is the direct attachments, kind of get impacted, but not so much the geometries which is way further down the line. So we've tried to make sure that we reduce that sort of downstream impact on geometries just because I'm editing something out here. So that's again an enhancement from reducing the errors that were getting created when people were editing or customers were editing geometries where something accidentally got changed downstream where they were not even aware of that. So we're trying to reduce that sort of impact on attached geometries. Another piece that I wanted to also mention was if you are working on a Greenland project, Greenfield project, you now have also the capability of being able to key in values when you're creating it. So you probably saw this sort of highlight come up quite a few times as I was demonstrating this. But while creating, I can always key in a value. So I could say 600 here, hit enter, and it gets locked into that value. And the same applies when I'm trying to create a curve. So let's say I'm trying to say 500, it gets locked into that value, to that radius value. I can move it along both directions. So I could go flip-flop on both directions. So that's possible as well. So as I go along the line and create these sort of geometries, I have the capability of being able to key in some of these attributes, specifically the length of the tangent and the curve radii while I'm creating the alignment itself. So I'm going to do that again. It's right there. Wow, that's that. So that's that. Some of the crazy things we've been doing also is you could actually create spiral roads as well because of the flexibility in that the tool provides. So it's really easy for you to create some really complex geometries and then play with the geometry in terms of how you want it to be laid out based on the constraints that you're working with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Another point I just want to quickly mention is we've tried to sort of, again, reduce the thinking you have to put in terms of how this alignment was created. So in this case, for instance, if you created an alignment, for instance, with PI, I'm going to just zoom in a little bit. I'm going to recreate that just a second. Switch to a curve type. And then create another one with just element-based layout. What you'll observe is we've tried to create the editing experience the same. It doesn't matter if it's an element-based road or a design or a PI-based road. The grips you see are the same. The behaviors you will have with those grips are the same. So you don't have to worry about the fact that, oh, did I use the PI-based approach to create this road? What type of geometry was put in there, etc., etc. But just have this sort of consistent behavior as you're editing the geometry and not have to think about that. You can also append, for instance, in this case, it's PI-based road. I could always go ahead and append an element-based road to this PI road and then get started from there. So it's defaulted to curve because that was tangent, but I can always switch to a different type if I want it. But I'm just going to continue placing the alignment. So yeah, so it attaches it right there to the PI-based alignment that I had created in the beginning. So you don't have to worry about how it was created, but just get through the task by using any of these tools and create the alignment and modify as you go about it. So that said, I am going to quickly sort of now segue into some of the work we did with quantities. I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I did lay out those road through some forest, wooded area, and I don't want to get caught up on that there. All right, so let's look at some of the work we did with quantities. So I have here a main line, and if you saw this section here, we have the tools for extracting material quantities and also volumes, total quantities. So I'm going to go ahead and click on material quantities, compute that, and what you see here is, again, switching to an engineering view. What you see here is now we highlight the region for which the material quantities was computed. So it's obviously doing the complete range of this road alignment, which is from station range 0 all the way to 5800. I could obviously change this range, but let's see what's my point of interest before I did that. Let's just say I'm interested in the range from 400 all the way to 1600. Let's just do that. I'm going to go back to the tool again. So I'm going to key in 400, hit enter. It's going to compute values. 1600. Compute values. So you see now that the highlight is reflecting the range I've set on that road. So you get that sort of visual feedback for where the computation is coming from. Some of the enhancements we did is now you start seeing generic pipes if your section here had any generic pipes. So generic pipes are pipelines you've created from this section here. So those are the 3D models. So if you have pipelines or pipe connectors created, those get reflected here. So in this section, I believe we have some generic pipes of metal pipe type, and then we have a count of 2, which is right there in that region that was set between these 2 stations. So those are something new that we added this past release. Something else that also got added is this sort of range you see here. So the depth range. So in this case, the inlets are showing you what's the depth count of the inlets for a different sort of range. So if there's something for less than 3 feet, between 3 feet and 7.5, 7.5 to 8.5, 8.5. And you can always go ahead and customize that. So I could go ahead and sort of customize the range from 3 to 6. Obviously, it picks up 6 right there, 9. So it kind of helps me with figuring out the earthwork material required to make that sort of adjustments there for where the inlets are going to be placed. So in this case, again, it's showing between 6 and 9 is where my count is, and I could go ahead and customize it as needed for where I want those to be placed. Obviously, it's right here. So if I do select it, it's going to show up there. So that's one of the enhancements. We also have the capability where you could now set this on 2 different alignments. So if you have a point of or a region of interest, you could set it up for that region in that alignment. So let's just do the same for this road. Kick off the material quantities. And customize this to a region that's, say, somewhere here. So I want to do that between station 1900 to 22. So I'm just going to do that. Trying to extract the report there. I think it's accidentally selecting a different road. So you see, I selected this region. Now, if I went ahead and selected another road, I'm actually using Control key right now and selecting these 2 sort of roads. So I could go ahead and select multiple roads and also see the visual feedback for the regions that it's computing this for. Now, beware, this doesn't compute for intersections. So in this case, obviously they don't have intersection. But if you did have intersections, so that region, we would not be able to calculate the material quantities. But we do provide that for other scenarios where you could now start seeing these sort of selection-based view. So you could set custom ranges for different sets of roads and use that sort of aggregation to compute the material quantities. The same could be done for cut and fill volumes. And cut and fill volumes calculates it for the intersection regions as well. One of the other, sort of quickly talking through this, one of the other enhancements we've made was being able to set some of the parameters on a component road. So I'm going to just take this sort of clean region here and create a component-based road. And it doesn't matter what type it is. I'm just going to do this. So another enhancement you will see here in this release is the capability of being able to set the depth for a lane component type. So if I were to create an assembly which had a mixed set of a combination, let's just say a median, or we could go for a RAS median. I could set depth on each individual sort of lane, so I could customize it. So before I even do that, let me just quickly bring up the cross-section view just so you know how this looks like. Just going to bring this over here. So this is kind of how it looks like right now. but I could select an individual sort of component and set a depth on it to say 1 feet. So you see the change here. So you could use this capability to sort of rough in, if you wanted, some of the subsurface values in terms of the cut fill material. So if I were to compute now, you could generate the earthwork quantities for the updated sort of volumes. So now the cut and fill is 5. So let's say cut for now is 560. I could always go ahead and change another and see how that would reflect. So change this to 2. Obviously, this is not realistic. I'm just showing this for demonstration purposes. But you could potentially use this to extract the cut volumes based on the change. So if I now brought up the cross-section view, you will see that there is obviously a different depth here, which is 2 feet that I've set on this lane component. Now this feature of being able to set the depth is available for the lane component, and also if your road had a shoulder component. So if I did insert a shoulder, the depth could be set on the shoulder type as well. Obviously median does, but if you had a jersey barrier or other sort of structures, you will not be able to set the depth there. But these different component types support capability of being able to set the depth value. All right, so that said, that's all for the demo I have. Obviously, like I said, the materials quantities that you compute is going to be dynamic. So as you go along your modeling, you could always compute this on the fly to sort of compare and contrast which option will lead to higher cost versus the other. So that could be used on the fly with these tool sets. The way we calculate the volumes is the average end area method, which is where we compare the sort of cross sections and then compute sort of the span there, and then use that to compute the volumes. That's kind of how we go about doing that. So if you did at this point bring up the cross-section view, you'll kind of see that dynamically sort of represent in a 2D plane how it's changing. So anyway, this was again just for demonstration purpose, not a whole lot of realistic sort of representation in this, what I just showed. But that's kind of all I have at this point. We'll open up the floor for any questions. We have about 11 minutes left. I do want to share quickly my contact information. If anyone's interested in directly reaching out to me, please feel free to do so. This is my email ID. You could also connect with me on LinkedIn. We always are looking for people to connect with and see and hear from them what they're facing on a day-to-day basis while they use the product, and incorporate that direct feedback into the product. So I'm always open to talking to people who want to express their thoughts. So feel free to reach out to me directly via email or via LinkedIn, and we could take it from there. But yeah, if you have any questions at this point, feel free to shoot them along. I will try my best to answer those questions.
Prateek, we've had quite a good volume of questions. You folks in the background that have been handling those, does anything stick out for you guys? I know there were a few questions regarding transferring the data to Civil 3D. Does anyone want to chime in on some of that stuff?
Hey Nick, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, so I think there were questions about both directions as far as data flow between InfraWorks and Civil 3D. So I guess the net is anything that we generate in InfraWorks right now, as far as what we would deem preliminary engineering, that the alignment and profile data will flow to Civil 3D, and you can then continue detailed design there based on that data. Going the other direction, so if I've got a fully detailed alignment and profile in Civil 3D and I bring that over to InfraWorks, with the new edit tools that Prateek showed today, that editing experience has gotten better. There are still some cases where we don't have enough functionality to allow edits to that data in InfraWorks after it's been created in Civil 3D. So Seth had posted a few links in the question and answer window that provide some more detail on those cases and what they are, but the edit work that we showed today is sort of the first step in improving that overall data flow and having the ability to edit sort of regardless of what we created. So more to come there, but it is improved from prior releases as far as how many, what kind of elements you can edit and can't edit with the new edit tools.
Great, thanks, Nick. Anything else from the questions team that sticks out for you guys? Any good questions pop up?
I think we got most of them covered, Eric.
Right. I know there's one here about a list of the commands or the capabilities, and it looks like based on your answer, Nick, a lot of the details of what Prateek talked about today will be published in the help, so folks will be able to reference that information about, different key sequences using the control key, that sort of thing. Some of the stuff he showed. Just looking back through the questions on the list here. Lots of good discussion as well, not so much questions, but discussion about the software capabilities. But I think you're right. Most of these have been taken care of by the team in the background, so great job, guys. I guess with that, I just want to take back presenter for just a moment and remind everybody about our upcoming webcast. So bear with me for just a second while I get that back on screen. So in 2 weeks, same time, same place, Charlie is going to be talking to us about developing custom storm parts. It's the parts editor functionality, which also ties into Inventor. And that system actually works for developing custom parts for both Civil 3D and InfraWorks. So if you're in one product or the other, this relates to you. So you definitely want to check that out. Charlie's going to dig a little deeper into setting up the different connection points and things like that. So I think it's going to be very informative, and we're all going to walk away from that with some skills that we didn't have beforehand. So looking forward to that. Great job, Prateek. Great job, the panel in the background answering questions. We had a ton of them today. I want to thank all of you who attended for giving us an hour out of your day. Happy New Year, by the way, and welcome back from your break if you've been off during the holidays, as I'm sure most of you have. And we hope to see you again in 2 weeks when Charlie talks to us about custom storm parts. Have a great day. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.